So the other day I went out into the blackberry patch and I picked myself more blackberries than I could possibly eat. Obviously, I needed to make a cobbler. So I scrolled through some recipes and I found one that told me not only which ingredients to use, but why each one was necessary. Like, it explained to me that butter makes the batter richer and cornstarch thickens the berries so the cobbler won't just be a big old juicy mess. At first I thought, how ridiculous. Everyone knows why we use butter and cornstarch. But do they? I started thinking about how often we do things because that is the way we are told to do things, but maybe we don't always know the why. And I think maybe it's like that with following Jesus too. As Christians, we talk a lot about following Jesus, but what we don't always talk about is why. So seriously, why follow Jesus? Because he could walk on water? Because he could turn a modest meal into enough food to feed thousands? Because he could heal sick people with just a touch? Now, in the early days, I think some people followed him, literally followed him from place to place just to see him perform such miracles. They were in awe of him and hoped some of his magical dust would sprinkle their lives with divine blessing. These days, I think people have other motivations for following Jesus. For example, I've heard people call Jesus their ticket to heaven. Gotta say, that seems a little odd to me, since Jesus' teachings were all about how we live this life, here and now. Jesus spent precious little time talking about what happens to us when we die. His main concern seemed to be how we live. If he'd only cared about what happened to people's souls, I don't think he would have spent his final 3 years on this planet taking such care of people's bodies and teaching his disciples to do the same. Following Jesus isn't just a personal journey to experience salvation or divine blessing on an individual level. Now, that very well may be a beautiful side effect of following Jesus, but the whole point of following him, the reason his original disciples followed him, is that Jesus showed us how to achieve salvation on a collective level, meaning how to live into God's will for humanity. When we collectively follow Jesus, we experience shalom, which can be understood as everyone thriving in community. Jesus showed people how to achieve salvation from the sins of greed, oppression, violence, cruelty, discrimination, resource hoarding, all the sins that stand in the way of collective thriving. And I think the most dedicated followers of Jesus in his time were the ones who understood this. They followed Jesus not because he gave them personal privileges or elevated status. He kept them quite busy serving others, not being served. But in serving, they were beginning to see a transformation of their communities. Jesus showed them how to feed the poor, tend the sick, befriend the lonely, and welcome the outcasts. It was the hardest work they'd ever done, but they kept on following him. I think because they were seeing how Jesus' way was actually making things better for the downtrodden people, their people. Jesus reached folks who were struggling to survive and showed them how they could thrive. But it was never about individual success. It had to be about the entire community. No one thrives unless everyone is thriving. That's the idea of shalom. Possibly the best story to illustrate that idea is the time when Jesus made his disciples feed a multitude. All they had was just a tiny bit of food, 5 little loaves of bread and a couple of fish, not much, but somehow it was enough. Thousands were served, and 12 baskets of leftovers were gathered up. 12. Representing the 12 tribes of Israel, symbolizing everyone who followed the God Jesus embodied. When they followed Jesus' example of sharing, there was enough for the entire community to thrive. God's abundance for God's people, thanks be to God. But those who followed Jesus would soon see that even their idea of community had to expand if they were to truly live into God's will of shalom for all. So not very long after the feeding of the Jewish multitude, Jesus and his disciples found themselves out of the country in Gentile territory, the northern regions of Tyre and Sidon, home to the remnants of the Canaanite people their ancestors had displaced. It was an uncomfortable place for them to be, given the history of genocide that had never been forgotten. Even worse, Jesus' people seemed to have a lingering feeling of superiority over the Canaanites. After all, who'd won the war? Not mean God favored the Israelites, right? We hear this disturbing attitude of superiority in Matthew's account of Jesus' time in this strange place. No sooner had he arrived, but A Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed instantly. This is absolutely one of my favorite stories about Jesus, even though it is kind of terrible. Did you notice? It starts out just awful. The first time the Canaanite woman asked Jesus for mercy, he did not answer her at all. This is appalling to me, yet it would not have fazed the first century Jewish audience for which Matthew is writing. Not at all. They would have nodded in affirmation. "That's right, Jesus, you don't talk to a Canaanite woman. She is not one of us." That's exactly what the disciples were thinking when they encouraged Jesus to just send her away, for she keeps shouting after us. What a nuisance. Who did she think she was anyway, this Canaanite woman? Didn't she know she was dealing with a holy man, a rabbi, someone who must not defile himself by getting too close to her? Gentiles were unclean, you know. So Jesus put her in her place, reminding her that he was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, meaning people who followed the one true God, not her or anyone like her. She was not as concerned, neither she nor her sick daughter. But she kept pestering him, even kneeling, meaning if she was going to be escorted out, she'd have to be picked up and carried, and it would not be pretty. Jesus tried to reason with her, reminding her of her lowly status compared to the children of Israel whom he served. It's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Oh man, if you're ever going to quote Jesus, please do not use that line. This is not Jesus' finest moment. And the huge irony is the only reason he even is in that Gentile place full of dirty Canaanite dogs is that he has just offended his own religious leaders back at home by scolding them for their hypocritical obsession with all their hand washing and dietary restrictions meant to keep them ritually pure. Jesus rightly pointed out that none of that stuff meant anything at all when the harmful words coming out of their mouths were what really made them unclean. According to Jesus, if they had truly pure hearts, they would only use kind words. And then he goes and calls this Canaanite woman and all of her people dogs. My friends, this is a problem. But the resolution to that problem is why I love this story so much. This Canaanite woman, of all people, reminds Jesus that it is possible for both the children of Israel and the dogs, her people, to be fed. In short, she challenges Jesus on his limited idea of blessing and abundance. And this is the moment when Jesus' own theology of God's grace expands. As his disciples watch in silent amazement, Jesus grows in understanding and offers immediate blessing to someone from the wrong faith tradition on the wrong side of the border. Immediately, the notion of shalom is extended to people outside of the inner circle of their faith. Followers of Jesus will never be the same from this moment on. Now they are obligated to view the entire world as their community, as worthy recipients of blessing. Jesus will say it very plainly closer to the end of his life as he will commission his disciples to go into the world and show people how it works to follow him. The book of Acts will show us how they did just that, going into faraway places, Gentile places, to teach people how to follow Jesus and thrive in their own communities. For me, the story of the Canaanite woman is like a hinge, the piece that allows the good news to open up from a small-scale reformation of one faith tradition to a wide-scale vision of what the whole world could be like if people learned the ways that Jesus taught. Jesus didn't just show some people how to thrive in community. Jesus showed the entire world how to thrive. And that, for me, is why I am compelled to follow Jesus. It is not because I want something lovely to happen to me after my time here on earth is finished. It's not because I think I'll personally experience blessing and God's favor simply because I call myself a Christian. I choose to follow Jesus because I truly do see his way as the path to wholeness and thriving, not for some, but for all. For those who would follow Jesus, The story of the Canaanite woman is a reminder to draw that circle wider and look beyond the limiting ways we might define community, as we realize that no one thrives unless everyone thrives. Our actions have impacts that are felt far beyond our perception, for better or for worse. This is both encouraging and terrifying, but we do have the obligation to think of the wider community, even the global community, if we are serious about following Jesus. And that is the beginning of our why as a church. We are a community dedicated to thriving. We support each other emotionally, spiritually, even physically and financially when the need arises. If some of us are not doing well, the rest of us, we come alongside to help. We pray, we call, we visit, we bring meals. That is where we began as followers of Jesus, by nurturing one another, but it's not our end goal. If all we ever did was to take care of each other, that would be beautiful, but it would not be following Jesus, because of the Canaanite woman and how she stretched Jesus' understanding of his own purpose, and by extension, that of his followers. We are compelled to look around and ask, who are the underdogs outside of our little network of care and concern? Those are precisely the people Jesus calls us as his church to serve. Do this with me, please. Close your eyes, if that's helpful, and imagine someone who is an underdog. Someone who might be saying, like the Canaanite woman said to Jesus, have mercy. What does this person need? And how might we, as followers of Jesus, collectively respond to that need? This is how we can pray this week, my friends. As we seek to follow Jesus, let us imagine how we can foster thriving in our community, not only our community of faith, but the wider community to which we are connected. In so doing, we will be following Jesus on his mission of bringing about God's will here on earth, God's will that all shall be well, not only surviving, but thriving in community. Let us go forth with this blessing. Send out in Jesus' name.